Okay, so this is an introduction to masking, basic masking in Photoshop, using the sort of an example hover shot style setup to what you've been doing here in class. So when you're working, I want you to open the files by simply going File, Open, and then navigating to where you have them stored. I currently have mine just sitting on the desktop. You're probably going to want to put those in your Photoshop exercises folder. So I'm going to select the two I want by clicking the first one and then holding down Shift to select the last one. So I'm going to open them both at once. And I have these two images. So you can see here I'm on this tab. This is the currently active one. It's a little bit highlighted. This is my other tab that is not open on the canvas. I can simply click on it to switch between the two of them. Because these are shot on a tripod, there's actually very little difference between the shot, right? Like the framing is pretty much the same between the two of them. What I want to do when I'm creating a hover shot is basically bring these two together and then cut out the background from the top one to some degree. So it's really easy to do. In your Photoshop toolbar, the top tool here looks like a 4-directional arrow. That's your move tool. That's what that looks like in Photoshop. You can also hit V at any time. V is the hotkey for a move tool. Now to bring this image right here over to my other image, which is what I want, because I want to drop the one where I'm kind of floating here or kneeling on the chair over to the other one, I'm going to click anywhere in this image. I'm going to drag, and then I'm going to hold over that other tab, and then let go. And you can see that the image has moved in there, and then I'm just going to click and drag and bring it down so that we get this nice, like those purple line up lines right there like that. So I'm going to undo this. I'm actually going to delete it, and I'm going to do it one more time. So grabbing the image that I want, I've got my move tool. I'm clicking, dragging and holding down, hovering over the image I want to drop it on, move my cursor back over the image, and let go. I basically have dragged that file over and then dropped it onto the new document. Then I just drag it down with the move tool until it's even here. A couple things to pay attention to. When you have your tools active here from the toolbar, along the top of your screen right here, you'll see a whole series of different actions that are available to you from that tool. One of the things that Photoshop has switched in recent iterations is that it has auto select checkmarked as its default, which drives me insane because I hate what auto select does for most of the work that I do. Auto select basically means that anything you click on this canvas, it basically selects that layer and then you start working with it, which is fine unless you have any sort of transparencies happening, and then you can never select the thing you want to select. So I always have that turned off. I'm just going to uncheck it. Okay. We're now good to go as far as like moving into masking. What we're trying to do is remove this chair right here. So it's a pretty simple procedure. There are two types of masking. There's additive destructive and non-destructive masking or erasing. So if we were to just grab an eraser tool, which looks like this one right here, it's a little kind of diagonal rectangle, half white, half black. I think kind of speaking to those lying erasers that were like half pink, half blue, and they'd say that the blue erased pen, and it never did. And I don't know why they like made those things. I was always like, oh, pen eraser. No, doesn't work at all. So we are going to not use the eraser. The eraser would be the equivalent of like if you had an actual solid photograph, cutting off pieces of it, right? Once you've cut those pieces off, they're gone. You threw them in the garbage, they're not coming back. There's no coming back from that. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure, we're going to rename some of these layers. So background is fine because background actually is a really good description of our background layer here. But we're going to rename this one hover. Hit enter, and we're going to rename it hover because this is kind of the layer where the hovering shot part of this image is going to be. And we're going to add a mask to this layer. So making sure this layer is selected, you go down to the bottom of your layers palette, which is this thing right here, and you click the thing. It looks like a little black and white Japanese flag. It's a little white rectangle with a little black square or a circle in the middle. And click that once. You're going to notice when you click that a little white square appears next to the little thumbnail of that layer. Notice it's not on any other layer. It's specific to that layer. And there's this kind of corner dashed sort of cropping icon around it. If I click back and forth, you can see, that it moves between those two parts of the little layer thumbnails there. Whichever one it is currently on is the one you are editing at that moment. So if I draw on this white one, this is the mask itself. I will not be actually affecting the pixels of the layer itself. I'm not going to be drawing, making actual marks there. What a mask does is it basically it's a little file, and I know this, I'm repeating this, but a mask is basically a file that's overlaid perfectly on your image, and it says this pixel should be this transparency. A fully white mask is basically says every pixel that this mask is attached to is fully solid, fully opaque. If I were to fill it in with black, so I'm going to select it here, and I can use the option to fill with foreground color, because my foreground color is black, which is option delete. You don't have to know this. But notice that layer disappears completely because I filled in this mask with black. If I do command delete, which fills with the background color, which is white here, I put it back to white, you see it becomes fully opaque again. So, making sure it's selected, we are going to grab the brush tool. You can see our brush preview here is very, very, very tiny. On your keyboard, the open and close square bracket keys right beside the P key on your keyboard allow you to change the size of your brush. So if you actually hold them down, you can actually scroll kind of between those sizes. So we're going to make a brush that's pretty big. I'm going with like a 900 or a 700 pixel brush. And I'm going to make sure by clicking on this little down arrow here beside my brush selector, size is set to 700 pixels. I'm going to drop the hardness down to about 10%. Gives it a nice sort of soft, easy gradient transition along the edges and allows me to kind of blend my foreground and background really nicely because there is a slight shift in lighting. Actually, I'm going to set my hardness to 100% just to demonstrate what I mean by that. If I go like this and I'm making sure I'm on my mask and I start drawing this in, right? You can see that I'm turning those pixels that I'm painting over transparent. But one of the things that's also happening is that there is a slight shift in the lighting between my two images or my two layers. And that's caused by shooting, I'm shooting on speed priority, and what happened is basically the camera's taken a look at what I'm shooting, averaged out all the sort of tonal values and said, this is your exposure. And then I removed myself from the shot, took it again, because I had removed that object, that average and that exposure was shifted just ever so slightly. The only way to truly compensate for that is to shoot full manual where you have those settings locked in for your speed and aperture. But that's okay. So we have this little bit of a transition there. You can see it's got a bit of a hard edge. So when I click on this little down drop arrow for selection, if I go down to a hardness of about 10%, it just really makes the edge of that brush a little bit softer, a little bit better for blending. And especially if you make the brush really big, that transition space gets a lot sort of more gradual, and you can just kind of really go in there. Remember to zoom in, it's spacebar command on the Macs. And I'm just going to blend those transitions a little bit to make them, not as intense. So I'm going to give you a little preview of what this looks like if I were to remove the background that we're essentially seeing through to. So I just click on this little eye on the layer of the background. This is what the layer we're working on looks like. I've basically erased, except that I haven't erased. I've basically told those pixels that they should be transparent. If I come back in and I switch my brush to white, simply I can either click this switch foreground background brush color, or I can simply click on the brush color here and change it up to white. If I paint back on, still on my mask here, if I paint back in here, I can basically paint those pixels back to being opaque as opposed to transparent. And that's really the advantage of working with a mask as opposed to erasing things, is you can always fix it and refine it as you need to. And go back to doing black. And I'm just going to blend this out, and I'm going to turn on my background layer so I can get a preview. Now it's just a matter of going in and really zooming in here and making sure my brush is small by using the square bracket key. When I'm working with these edges, I want the hardness of the brush to be a little bit higher, kind of like a 79–80%, and a little bit smaller as well, because I want to really kind of see that edge there. Oh, I've got smoothing on a little bit, so I've got a little bit of a lag. I'm going to take my smoothing down just to like 12%. It's not good to have your smoothing on too high. It basically evens out your stroke on whatever you're doing with your mouse. But what ends up happening is it can be a little bit too extreme, and you get this lag between what you're doing with your mouse and what you're kind of seeing on screen. I'm just kind of following along the edge here. It's not going to be perfect. I'm going to try and keep my mouse moving fairly cleanly here, not have too many jaggies on the edge. And I'm going to, then I'm just going to go in with a little bit bigger of brush here and get rid of any sort of remaining bits between the two areas I've masked. Just go this, like that. And then also come in with, just drop that hardness of the brush down again here, right where I'm getting that little bit of a transition issue. Make it a little bigger. Always keeping one hand on my keyboard, changing the size of my brush as needed. Then I'm just going to come back in here, and I'm going to once again make the brush a little smaller. See there, that edge is a little fuzzier than I'd like, so I'm just going to make sure that the brush hardness goes up to like about 50%. Just that transition there between those spaces doesn't look obviously retouched. Now, we've got some room for fiddling around here, right? We're working with cloth. We're not doing a very noticeable hard edge, so you can just use your mouse or your touchpad, and you should be able to, with a little bit of fiddling, get a pretty decent sort of cutout here. Even if it ends up being not 100% accurate. And going along that line. And you want to pay attention to things like the corner here, right? That should be fairly clean. Then I'm just going to mask out the rest of this. So, a couple of important concepts just before I finish this recording and this video. The big one is on your mask. Your mask is just there to tell your pixels how transparent they should appear. So it's basically a message being sent from your mask to your layer. That's what makes it so powerful, is that you can always change that message because you haven't destroyed any of the pixels by permanently altering them, right? So this is kind of what the final image looks like. If I were to do that. If I were to delete this mask, basically the entire original image would come back, and I'd be left with my sort of original image. Important thing is, black is fully transparent, white is fully opaque, and every one of the 256 shades of gray between black and white on a computer is a different percentage of transparency, which is why a soft edge brush basically allows you to perfectly blend between two areas, because you're kind of almost making it semi-transparent. So that's an introduction to masking. Once you're done, you simply go File, Save As, and you go to wherever you need to save it, in this case probably in your Google Drive. You're going to save it as the format JPEG, and you're going to save it as the format Photoshop. So you have both, but you're going to call it